Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for episode 191. Some of me thinks we should just create seasons or something. I don't know. It's been 3.5 years, 3.25 years, something like that. Very, seems like a long time on the radio, you know. I don't know. I'm not one of those hosts that gets to host a morning show every day and get paid to do it. So, you know, those people, their days go by very quickly. Ours here go by in a different way, quickly, based on our real jobs. But tonight, our job is to have a conversation with you about a couple of different things. So we're going to start the episode off by doing a quick discussion about the new whistleblower. Because we talked last week about the impeachment process, different portions of the impeachment, how it could affect the United States. And I thought, you know, given this new news that just came out this weekend, it would be a benefit to actually have that conversation as well. But before we get into it, let me introduce you to the guests and the host for tonight. Boyce from Mindful Skeptics Podcast, and Keith, our new co-host. How are you tonight, dudes?
Doing good, brother.
I'm just so overwhelmed with emotion.
Well, you should be. So Keith is our resident Canadian expert, and Boyce joins us from Mindful Skeptics Podcast. And tonight, they're here to offer their expertise. You could tell we've been drinking it already. So,
yeah, you use the word expertise, but I don't think that word means what you think it means, given the context.
I think it kind of does. But before we get into that, let's how have you all been? So it's been a very long week. We've had a lot of updates. I think people finally stopped caring about bashing Greta, but this whole Trump thing just seems to keep coming up.
Yeah, it's funny that people aren't bashing Greta, because Jason Momoa went and did the exact same thing, and you don't hear people bitching about that. Now, I'm given the comment section hell that I went through. Apparently, he's a somewhat anti-vax these days, but he is Samoan, so he does have a fair bit to say about keeping our oceans clean. And I mean, given that his culture tends to care about the ocean, I think he might know a thing or two about getting wet. Wow, there was a double entendre that I didn't even mean for that one.
Yep. All right. Just keep moving.
He likes
he
the
has
ocean.
that effect on others, so I've heard.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've seen him as Aquaman, and while Justice League may have not been a good movie, he still did it for me. You know.
I think he does it for a lot of people. I don't think that's unique to you, my friend.
It's the eyebrows. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It's just, there's something there. But yeah, he also went on this whole, we're fucking poisoning our oceans. I think at one point he said there's more particles of plastic in our ocean than there are stars in the sky.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure about the scientific accuracy of that, but I do like the message. I mean, we are polluting our fucking oceans. And I mean, if you want to, you know, clean up our environment for the sake of the fucking planet, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And I think the thing, you know, here you hit the head on is people were complaining about Greta, but nobody's complained about Jason.
Nope.
So,
well, no, because he's not a 16-year-old girl that they can easily make fun of and, you know, just brush to the side. I mean, yeah, they'll probably just ignore it because, actors should stay in their lane, unless it's John Voight or Randy Quaid who's going off on some tangent about, you know, being anti-left, but, you know, tokenism, right?
Exactly.
Celebrities don't know anything unless they agree with me.
I think that kind of ties into some of the recent things that have come up. Trump's been doing a pretty good job at redirecting, I don't want to call it his anger or his intellect, but he's done a good job at redirecting his attention to other things. And it's kind of funny because he had a tweet the other day, right? And I don't know if you cover this on your podcast yet, boys. But he had a tweet the other day that basically said, hey, I'm just trying to make the public aware of a dishonest government, essentially. And you just sit here and you're like, all right, yep, you still got to do things legally, my friend, but good for you, I guess.
Yeah, he wants to execute Snowden for whistleblowing, but now he wants to whistleblow on other people, and it's such a double standard. And well, you can't rationalize irrationality, so I just leave it alone. I've actually decided to kind of just keep Trump out my mouth as much as I can, because the more we talk about him, the more he's winning. And like you said, he gets to kind of orchestrate the narrative by saying stupider shit, to make you talk about the stupidest thing he said, but ignore the less stupid things he says. That gets him impeached.
Yeah. And today he's been going off, or not today, tonight, he's been going off on Nancy Pelosi. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, he just doesn't know when to not tweet, and hopefully that's just going to be the end of him at some point. And it's kind of funny because today on my Facebook page, he actually re-signed a law that helps fund children with disabilities, right? And I posted it and I said, hey, look, here's the one good thing this guy's done. And I'll be honest, I understand sometimes why people on the right feel very, very offended by people on the left, because I had a bunch of leftists kind of attack me to basically, well, that he doesn't do anything else good, or he's just signing an Obama thing. I get it. 100% get it. Don't disagree. I don't want to give him any credit than what is due. But for Christ's sake, if we can't find at least one or two positive little cookies here, this guy is officially not Hitler yet. And even in that, we should at least be honest in our conversations and honest about what we believe in. And if he does something that benefits the good, great. Call it out. But at the same time, it doesn't redeem him in my eyes. It doesn't make him... No. I'm not going to go vote for him. And I even posted that. I'll never vote for him. But hey, thank you, Trump, for not doing something completely shitty all the time. I don't know.
Yeah. He's made a few good decisions, like reversing himself on this whole Nancy DeVos thing about defunding the Special Olympics, and not blowing up Iran in a reaction. That's a kind of a good one. And then also on this one, then also like giving the veterans more access to VA doctors, like it's expanding their coverage or something that really helps the veterans get the care they need when they come back home. But I know one good way to fix that is stop sending people into war. They won't come home injured. That's a cost savings effective, Republican talking point.
That's crazy talk.
Yeah. What do I know?
Yeah.
No, to kind of circle back here, it just kind of reminded me of something that I was watching. So at work, I get the luxury of having, I can watch YouTube and Netflix and shit. So I've watched a lot of TV. And lately I fell into a John Oliver hole. So I've been going through his YouTube and watching a lot of his episodes. And he did a segment on Ivanka. And he did point out that there's one key difference between her and Trump. And yes, of course, they did highlight him being really creepy with her. And just makes me so uncomfortable. But she's written in her one book, she was talking about it isn't so much what's important, or the truth isn't so much as important as what people perceive, which is really interesting because I think that's something she learned from her father. But I think she seems a lot more composed about it, where instead of just constantly throwing something out there to try to distract people with this scandal, or he said this, or he's done that, or whatever, she's a lot more composed about it. Not that I really want to give that family a whole lot of credit, but I do think in that vein, she has definitely taken it in I want to say a better way, or a less annoying way.
I think she's figured out the less you say, the smarter you sound now.
Well, same could be said about her husband, because apparently he doesn't really talk a lot, and everybody says that makes him seem so much smarter, even though his dad is like in jail or was indicted or something.
Yeah, the whole family's screwed. I can't wait to see all them peckerheads in the same suit, matching suits.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Color
Yeah, and I think we may get to see a taste of it. I don't know. I think it'll all kind of depend on what happens with this impeachment, right? But the big thing that came up this weekend was a second whistleblower, and it's kind of funny because Trump actually has gone out of his way to accuse Democrats of helping the second whistleblower write up basically write up his testimony, right, for the presentation. And I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't feel like commenting on that unless we know whether it's true or not. But essentially, there is a gentleman named Mark Zaid, the attorney of the first whistleblower, is now announced that he's representing a second one. And he tells ABC essentially that the second person, also described as an intelligence official, has firsthand knowledge of some of the allegations outlined in the original complaint and has been interviewed by the head of the Intelligence International Watchdog Office, right? So I think that's this is pretty important. More people are coming forward. If you look at Brett Kavanaugh, it didn't seem to matter how many women came forward. Nobody seemed to believe them. But maybe in this instance, because it's now talking about international crime and what needs to happen to get an impeachment, maybe now there will be more people that will be on board with saying, hey, at least here, this is pretty much a grounds where it says you can no longer do something illegal.
Well, yeah, and the big thing is the conservative friends that I have are saying, this is like saying, my best friend's roommate's cousin Becky's boyfriend said blah, 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 blah. Because it's second and third person information. But now with this whistleblower saying first person, there's no, telephone game going on there. It's just like, I heard him say this. I saw him do this on the record, coming forward. And it's going to get real interesting if this thing gets to be found to be credible. It's going to be really significant. Considering he's already thrown his vice president under bus and Giuliani's losing his shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's expendable to him, right? As long as they're not profitable to him, he will throw anybody under the bus. I mean, I have no doubt that if he could make more money off of it than to not do it, he would probably have Melania deported. If that would be his best interest. I have no doubt that he would stoop to that level. I'm not saying that he would. I'm not saying there's reason to. I'm just saying he strikes me as the person who is so devoid of character and integrity that his devotion to his own personal gain is such that he has no other loyalty. He's not capable of any other loyalty. I mean, we've seen this. He's been talking about how excited he is to talk to North Korea and to Putin and whatnot. And it's just he's revealing with his character. He just doesn't care about anything that won't get him ahead.
Yep. He's the ultimate con man.
And the funny thing is what he was trying to get, them to investigate, right, was the fact that there was somebody sitting on a board, Biden's son essentially, is sitting on the board, and Biden, was there representing the United States, creating a conflict of interest. And I just want to go, Isn't that similar to what your kids are doing too? Every day. Like, is there an irony here that we're all missing? Like, do you not how do you not put two and two together, man? I don't know. Maybe it's just deal with what's in front of you and then run the other way. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Because his kids have about as they're about as deep as a puddle, and it just doesn't make any sense to have these higher echelon dinners with like royalty, and they're looking at her like she's just the most stupidest thing on two legs. Oh yeah, such and such, this and that, and immigration, and they're like, okay,
nothing.
Yeah, just a bottomless.
And it's really all just a facade. I mean, it's only because of the position that the United States have. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they're concerned that if they were to start snubbing Trump and turning their noses up at him and his family, that suddenly that could damage, relations with people in the United States who, they don't dislike, the good parts.
It could cost them big bucks too.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to watch the development of this. You know, again, as we talked about last week, I'm not 100% sold on the whole impeachment thing. I hope this is not going to be a distraction from people going out and voting in the primaries, and I hope this isn't a distraction from next year's presidential election. That's what I hope. But you never know, right? You never know. Moving on.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. You got something else?
I said all this could be totally irrelevant and outdated in 24 hours.
It probably
will be.
It probably was.
You know?
With Trump, everything is outdated. And
I don't know what's going on his Twitter. Let me find out.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
He's just bashing Nancy Pelosi. Don't worry. Move on. Anyway, so I thought another great topic to talk about tonight. And this one's not political per se, right? It doesn't have a specific political lean, though I do think it kind of gets into a little bit of the topics that we talked about last week. We hinted on it in basically our special conversation we had for the Patreons only, where we talked through a conversation about, censorship, what should be censored, what shouldn't be censored, how comedians play a role in today's society, and if comedians, we should respect and allow comedians to basically say whatever they want. And I don't think anybody on this podcast would go, Nazis have, and thanks, Pippi. Anyway, sorry, my dog gets involved in the show sometimes, but
Got strong opinions. It's drugs in American too. I get it.
Yeah. And she has her right to say what she wants as a border collie. But anyway, we talked about, we had a discussion a little bit about, comedians and their role inside of society and should they be able to say anything? And we were saying stuff about Nazis, right? Should Nazis be able to say whatever they want? Yes. But should they be able to do it without repercussion? No. And I think everybody in this chat right here would say absolutely not, right? And I think...
Well, freedom of speech is not freedom from repercussions. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we're all on that same page, but all of us have slightly different opinions, I think, when it comes to, what the media portrays. And I'll be honest, I've taken a harder line stance, such as I disown Dave Chappelle. I have no interest in having a conversation about him. I don't want to watch any of his stuff anymore. I don't endorse any of his stand-up specials. I have a very hard time with Joe Rogan as a personal individual. But I think the difference here is that I wanted to talk about the new Joker movie. And I wanted to talk about it because of the fact that, we could get into semantics about whether it's a good movie or a crappy movie a little bit later. But everybody started freaking out about the Joker, and essentially people were putting out calls to arms to say, hey, boycott this movie, don't go here, it's too violent, it's too sympathetic to incel culture. And I thought that would be a good topic tonight, given the background of everybody on this show, and the fact that if we don't address this, how can we move forward as a society? Where is that free speech line? Where is that line where we should be morally panicked about what's being put out in the media? So has anybody seen the movie other than myself?
I watched it earlier today with my daughter.
Oh, how old's your daughter?
17.
All right. So she was legal age then.
They're legal there with me. I took them to see all kinds of crazy shit. Like I took them to see Deadpool when they're like freaking 10. I really regret that. I didn't know.
You regret it because they started using lines against you, didn't they?
Yeah, no shit.
Anyway, so Keith, have you had the chance? Have you seen the movie yet, or no?
No, I haven't yet. I'm curious to see it. I like the Joker as a character. I mean, I just have this sick fascination. I mean, I guess society collectively has this fascination with people who are completely devoid of our traditional sense of morality. For me, I have a degree in psychology, and it's just, I'm always just really fascinated by the different ways people can turn out based off of different circumstances, I guess, which is why I can sometimes seem like I'm being empathetic to assholes. It's not intentional. It's just mostly just as curiosity. But honestly, I am curious to see, because I do like the character of the Joker. But I am aware that it has been accused of being sympathetic to, the guys who just sit there and they go into these echo chambers online that are all, anti-women, anti-this, anti-that, and next thing you know, one of them is rolling up to school and has 3 guns and has to make a show of things, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's important that with our artistic license, we be careful about how we portray that. Should we feel the need to portray that as a character, it does play into the free speech debate, in the sense that we obviously shouldn't be saying, we can't let people see this. We can't. We got to bury it down. That flies in the face of the idea of free speech. However, I do think it gives us a chance to maybe look at different ways we could try to educate people, as sort of an antidote, if you will. But that's just, more wild speculation and a person who's just kind of curious to see a movie.
Boys, your opinion. You saw the movie. What do you first impressions? Let's do first impressions, and then we'll get into a couple of the articles that I have.
So just crawling out of my own head, just watching it as someone consuming a movie, which I'm a huge movie nut. And I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it because it goes into the psychology of that breaking point for people, where some people snap is because of a lot of these different stressors. And it talks about mental illness and being deceived by a parent, and how that turns its ugly head, and you get these little sociopaths. And I thought it was interesting how they took that different approach. How do you create this super villain Joker? And then they kind of reverse engineer the idea of, okay, this guy's got a real messed up life. Let's portray that and show how sick people's lives can be, to make them be, totally just not their whole psyche is broken and shattered, and they just snap.
All right, so before we go too much farther, I thought it would be good to let's look at the definition for incel. And it's just off Wikipedia. Anybody wants to correct it, I'm sure. Hopefully no incels listen to this show, but you never know, I guess. So incel stands for involuntary celibates, and they call them online. They're an online subculture who define themselves as unable to find romantic or sexual partners despite desiring one, creating a state they describe as inceldom. Discussions in the forum are often characterized by resentment, misogyny, myopathy, self-pity, self-loathing, racism, a sense of entitlement to sex, and the endorsement of violence against sexually active people. The American nonprofit, the SPLC, described the subculture as part of the online male supremacist ecosystem that is included in their hate groups. Now,
Jesus Christ.
So there you go. So that's different, I think. And we can read the description to the Joker movie if we really want to. But I'm going to guess, based on my knowledge of the Joker, right, that he is not specifically part of somebody that feels privileged, right? Nope. And if you go through this movie and you actually watch the movie, you'll understand that he's a picked-on individual. He doesn't feel that he's entitled to anything in any way, shape, or form. At no point throughout that movie does he feel that he should have been handed something because he is superior. That is not anything that comes from this. And I'll be honest, I'm a little partial to the Batman Joker thing because Batman's probably one of my more favorite characters in comic book world, right? And for me, if you go back through any of the comic books, you will not find the Joker throughout there thinking he's entitled to own the world. Now, if we look at like what's a psychotic individual, or somebody that has, I don't know, psychotic tendencies, A lot of them feel entitled. A lot of them feel that they are better, that they know better, therefore they should be able to take action where other people should not. That fits into an incel philosophy. On the opposite side, though, you have people that are in minority groups, and no, a white guy is not in the minority group. But if you look at other minority groups and we look at other things that have happened, people get beat down. They get put into a corner. And when the whole Ferguson, I don't know if anybody remembers the Ferguson riots, right?
Yes.
My wife and I actually
Didn't somebody get hit by a car?
They got ran over.
Yeah, yes. In the Ferguson riots, this has got to be back in like 2012,
16.
I think? No.
It's 12.
No, it's
2012.
this is a while ago. And my wife and I actually were watching the riots on TV. People are filming it. It's like broadcast live. And we're sitting here talking about, her and I were talking about it. And the big thing here is we were talking about if you take a community and you make a community poor and you continually treat a community with disrespect and you work towards ensuring that the community does not have legs to stand on the same way other people do, what happens to that community? People make poor decisions. They do horrible things sometimes, and they react. And it's just like if you beat a dog, at some point it's going to go cower in its cage. Well, when you start beating it in its cage, what do you expect that dog to do? And I'm not trying to say minorities are dogs. I'm just using it as an example, saying, hey, when you beat somebody to the point where they have no other options but to either die or fight back, sometimes those things can be horrible. I don't feel the Joker has in any way, shape, or form ever emulated an incel philosophy. He, on the opposite side, has somebody that may have mental illnesses, very, very probably does, and was beaten down into the corner. And if you watch that movie, the indications that he is being abused, is suffering from the areas where where he's basically poor. He's not able to get health care. He's not able to get the medication he needs. What do you think that's going to do to somebody? Now, I'm not excusing violence at all in any way, shape, or form. This podcast doesn't promote violence except against Nazis. That's it.
Oh, good. I was afraid I was going to have to add the caveat, except when it comes to punching Nazis.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that, Keith.
Just make it sure.
I think we have an episode entitled "Punching Nazis."
I think we were there.
You definitely do.
Yeah,
I've listened to that one.
So we don't promote violence, but what the idea here is that this movie is capturing the raw aspects of what can happen to any individual when you put them through some of these other horribly related things. And personally, and maybe this is my bias filtering in here, when I watch that movie, the thing I see about it is when we look at the healthcare system and we look at the rich eating the people on the bottom, those are the two main characteristics that not only follow Batman and Joker throughout that series, but follow them throughout this movie.
Yeah, it definitely shows you the privilege. Without giving any spoilers, it shows what privilege does and shows the opposite of privilege in this movie without really going into too many details. You'll know what I'm talking about when you see it. It's obvious. It's just poverty everywhere, strife, downtrodden. There's trash on the roads because of like a garbage strike or some shit, So it just really emphasizes the concept of this movie to me is to try and understand the origins of violence, not condone it. We're trying to understand the origins or the mechanisms that breed it, without really saying, "Oh yeah, well, violence happens because we're assholes." But it's like, let's be a little more understanding that we are part of the problem too.
Yeah. I don't know, Keith. What's Keith? So Keith's the only one that probably hasn't seen this movie yet. But
it's true. I like the. Again, having not seen that, I can't really comment too much about the content of it. But there definitely is value in a narrative that demonstrates, you take a population and you beat it down, you push it into the sidelines, and you demonize them, even though they are the majority population. To be honest, that's really just more of a social commentary to me.
Yeah. And I think that's actually what they're going for with that. I mean, they've interviewed both the director and Phoenix, and they've talked through some of these things. You know, one of the big quotes, you know, essentially was, and this is what he says. He said, "We didn't make the movie to push buttons. I literally described to Phoenix at one point in those 3 months as like, look at this as a way to sneak a real movie into the studio system under the guise of a comic book. We want to we want to glorify. It wasn't that we wanted to glorify this specific behavior. And I don't think it's a filmmaker's responsibility to teach morality. And if you don't know the difference between right and wrong, then there's all sorts of things that you can interpret in any way you want. And I think that's where this whole incel thing is. Now, I'll be honest. I mean, my first concern on Friday was, is somebody going to come to the theater and shoot people up? Is somebody going to take this the wrong way? And I think that happens quite a bit. I mean, we can look at Columbine, right? And people were using Marilyn Manson's music to justify killing people. And if you listen to Marilyn Manson's music, you would know that it's again, it kind of goes back to similar. If you're an abused individual, you're going to lash out to some extent. But Marilyn Manson's never really lashed out at anybody for the most part. You know, I mean, I won't say he's a saint, but you know, none of his. I
think his quote unquote lashing out. If you listen to him speak, he's a very intelligent human being. I think for him, his idea of lashing out, the greatest way to lash out is to not lash out, but to create. You know, like he's created rebellion. He's given home to the kids who, you know, don't fit into the so-called mainstreams of society, because he didn't. I mean, he was bullied. He was picked on as a kid. He went to a Catholic school, I think it was, and all of the next thing they know that, oh, he's, you know, talking about all this sex, this violence and blood and all of that, but he's not putting it into a positive light. He's just talking about it. He's making sure that the conversation is out there, and that, you know, somebody who gets rejected by society still has a place. And not only do they have a place, but they've got a pretty damn good spot like him. I mean, he's clearly successful.
Yeah. I mean, think of it this way, too.
A scapegoat.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. He's nothing more than a scapegoat. People want to use him as a way to say, fuck the world, it's all his fault. And, you know, it's the same way, you know, I mean, Hannah and I had this discussion about 6 months ago about Slayer, right? I'm a big Slayer fan. They utilize some very questionable symbols in some of their discussions. But if you listen to their music, they have openly said, we're not Nazis, and if you're a Nazi, I hope to hit you in the pit. They literally want to beat the fuck out of Nazis, you know, even though some of their symbology is very, that's not a real word, but it's very similar, you know, and that's the thing is, we had to have that discussion back then, and now we could turn this discussion here, right? You know, like, there was a shooting because there was a guy in 2012 that basically said, I'm the Joker, and for The Dark Knight Rising, jumped into the Colorado theater and shot it up, right? And so the first thing I think of is, okay, well, what are the two things in this country missing? Well, three things. One, we don't have healthcare for everybody. Two, we don't have a very good mental health system that's easily accessible to everybody. And three, we have rampant gun possession. What do you think's going to happen? You can't blame a movie for these type of things. You need to go back to the society and look at, where is the society failing? Where can we improve on? And why would we blame an art type for this?
Because it's easier than owning up to your own mistakes.
Yeah,
it's easier than... Absolutely, but it's enough of a distraction that you can at least harp on it until something else happens and the attention's off of the issue.
I always correlate this to this one time where these two kids committed suicide, and it just so happened they were listening to Linkin Park's first album. Oh, no. And they try to correlate the Linkin Park promotes suicide. I'm like, because the parents, I'm not trying to say anything negative about the parents, but someone didn't want to take responsibility or maybe not responsibility, but ownership of the situation. They're like, it's because Lincoln Park was talking about suicides. They weren't. And same thing with Korn. Korn was talking about how kids are abused, not actually go kill yourself, and music and movies
Judas
always
Priest
get,
in the 80s.
Yeah. All that kind of dumb shit. People are looking for, like you said, a scapegoat or something to point at, to not look within themselves, be like, okay, what's our family life like, or what's our mental health like you're saying, mental health awareness period in a family. It's not even about the parents necessarily. Some kids are just chemically imbalanced or have been traumatized, don't speak to their family about it, like molestation and stuff in the Catholic churches or whatnot, where these kids are suffering and you can't see it and they won't talk to you about it. And that's painful for families to accept. But to go off and blame Marilyn Manson and Eminem and whoever else you want to blame it on, it's lazy.
Absolutely. And I on the suicide thing, I think the problem with this, a very, very, very delicate issue like that is, because it's so difficult to put yourself in the frame of mind to understand why somebody would, want to not direct that violence outward. I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and go, yeah, well, I hate the people I work with. I could understand why somebody would want to, take a few shots at them, so to speak. Ha ha ha. And, we can kind of laugh that off. But when it comes to something like suicide, the direction of that violence inwards, that is so foreign, because it completely goes against the idea of self-preservation. And that's just people looking for something to blame instead of accepting that, there is no blame. We need to grab something to blame. We need that scapegoat to help us with our pain instead of actually dealing with it.
Yeah, exactly. And, I found another article from NPR. I started looking up some censorship discussions, right? And I think, I don't know, we could have a 10-hour discussion about this, or, a 10-minute discussion about this. But I think one of the big things is, I found an article from last year that talks about censorship for people like InfoWars, right? For Alex Jones. And people want to advocate, should we be censoring him? Should we be censoring some of these nut jobs at all? Should we do any of these different things? Where does that line fall in, especially somebody like Alex Jones, who's advocated that the Sandy Hook murders are a big conspiracy?
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because Alex Jones has really shot himself in the foot on that one by pushing that issue so far. I mean, he's being sued by how many of the parents? And Alex Jones is either incredibly brilliant, or he's in the same league as where we think Trump might be intellectually.
Ding, ding, ding.
He's either secretly brilliant in the sense that he sees his demographic. He knows that they have this specific mindset, that their way of thinking will line up if he talks a specific way, if he can just give them something to think about. But instead of actually talking about issues, he's just kind of letting wild and rampant speculation go crazy. And I do that all the time. I have a microphone and I don't have millions of followers, and I don't have a lot of people buying stuff that I'm selling them, even though I'm telling them that the world is going to end anyways, and that the currency that they're using to pay me is going to be worthless. But that's its own other thing. And just the way he's gone after the Sandy Hook parents and families, I do think he has violated the idea of free speech on that, because of how much he has pushed for people to see that as a false flag and see all these mass shootings as false flags. And I think he is getting into dangerous territory and violating free speech by trying to incite people to go up against those people and say, no, you're not actually dealing with that. And it's a very gray area, but I do think that he's definitely opening up the conversation for us. I mean, evidently.
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing here, I think you're right too, does it try to incite violence? And the large question is, when we look at the Joker movie, does it try to incite violence? And if it does, what type of violence is it trying to incite? And I go back to, if you look at the movie Seven, has everybody seen the movie Seven?
Absolutely.
It's been a few years, but yeah.
Okay, so good. So we can all at least say, if you look at that,
I know what's in the box.
You know what's in the box. So do I.
And it deserves to be in the fucking box because she's crazy. Sorry, she's not. It's not that she's crazy. It's because she's a liar and a charlatan.
All right, we're gonna
carry on. You were
we're
running
gonna
a show.
pass that for a second because that's not the point of the discussion here. But the idea here is Seven was a very disturbing look, to some extent, when it goes into the mind of somebody that's psychotic, somebody that's a serial killer, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not based on a real life thing. It's based on fictional depiction of different things, and it's a very good movie. There's another show called Mindhunter on Netflix that is actually based on, some real life serial killer experiences and how some of this terminology came to be, how, the unit, basically helped define what serial killing is in society. And we could sit here and we could talk about, what do we want to censor? What do we not want to censor? Well, I would be more open to censoring people that are going out of their way to incite violence based on the fact of their ideology. Like, if we had Christians saying we should be killing those that support Planned Parenthood, that's a problem to me. We have Nazis going out there, we should kill people that don't want to have a pure race. That's inciting violence. We should not be censoring material where somebody stands up and says, I'm fighting back based on, what has happened. And I'm going to get aggressively angry because I was shitted on, essentially, right? And society has made it harder for me. Let's not stop that, because to me that actually offers up a message that we don't get from other material. And the difference is the fact that it's not going out of its way to say, I want you to become the Joker. And it's funny because South Park has their first episode talks a little bit about this, and I reference South Park probably more than I should.
Damn it, South Park.
But it does, like
Joker. We're in the flashback.
They talk, they talk about it, and essentially it's like, essentially Cartman discovers he can send anybody to the detention camps if they are illegal. And then essentially the people inside of the camps, they talk to Kyle, who gets sent to this detention camp. And he goes, you understand what you're doing to all these kids. You're going to create a Mexican Joker at some point. And then it becomes this whole theme of the show, Mexican Joker. And you're sitting there like, all right, that's kind of fair, right? That's actually a very fair point. That's what the Joker movie is getting at. It's not telling you, let's rebel against society. It's telling you that if we don't watch what we're doing inside of society, we will create people. We will, maybe not create people, that's a bad word. We will help enable, there you go, people to do violence, to create change in ways that may be immoral and against society's best interest.
Well, you can sum that all up by just saying this is how you create extremists, period. Because it's extremism. This guy is just going to extreme measures now to blow up the system that he hates, that has hurt him, or whatever you want to perceive it. Hurt everyone around him. But that's how you create extremism of any sort: religious ideologies, bigotry, racism. It's all the same motivations.
Shit, look at Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight series, right? Every character in each of the trilogy is the same thing. If you look at the first one, Ra's al Ghul essentially basically says it's too late for society. How do we create and change this? Then you had the next one with the Joker with Heath Ledger, mm-hmm. and his whole thing.
I mean, I know I look like him, but come on.
Meow.
Maybe not really.
And don't take this away from me, Tanner.
And you get that same, viewpoint right there, right? And then you go into, The Dark Knight Rises, and you're getting Bane now, who's just probably a little bit more competent than the Joker. The Joker is really good at playing all these crazy tactics to create chaos, but Bane just came out and said, I'm just going to waylay everything. I'm going to...
Lay waste?
Yeah, lay waste. There you go. What did I say?
Waylace.
Same thing. It means the same
thing. A little
thing.
mumble with the truth.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you had 3 scotches tonight. But if you look at those, nobody complained about those movies. And now all of a sudden everybody's saying here, and I'm not saying is, oh, well, hey, just because we didn't complain the first time, we shouldn't complain now. I'm saying is, let's not miss the true underlying current, the true underlying point here. Let's accept it, move forward, and say, how can we be better stewards to those that live next to us, live with us, and want to be a part of us, instead of creating Joker types that will destroy society.
Yep, we can stop a lot of that by not using drones on villages and hospitals, and like we're creating extremists overseas as well as domestically by marginalizing people or just pretty much death from above. But that's just political side of it. But socially, it starts with people being a little more empathetic of people that have challenges of people that are living in poverty. Really, that's my experience, where I remember just being laughed at because my pant zipper broke once. Like, my zipper broke, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And it was the first hour of school too. It wasn't the last hour. I couldn't flip it by. I had to suffer all damn day with that damn thing. I was gonna say some bad words.
I think I've already said
it just
the worst
suffered
one.
all damn day, man. I'm just like, shit. How long can I hold these books in front of me? So I just remember that weird feeling of just alienated. You're like, oh shit, I'm exposed. My poverty is showing, type of thing, and it sucks.
I mean, my wife kind of laughs because I make the joke about one of the modern fashion trends, and that is pants sitting a little higher than your ankle now. I was made fun of a lot as a kid. My parents couldn't really afford a lot. My dad would go months without a day off. Like, that's just how much he had to work in order for my parents to break even, put money on the table, that sort of thing, or put food on the table. And, I was always a really tall, really thin kid. And when you're really thin and have really long legs, it is next to impossible to find pants that at least come down and touch the top of your shoes. So I got made fun of a lot for that. So I can understand, like, kids are horrible. Like, let's just be honest. Like, kids are horrible, but they don't need to be. I mean, we can raise kids to be better. The problem is that we just need to set a better precedent, I think.
Yeah. But starts at home. Oh yeah. Also, that makes you look more and more like Conan O'Brien now. If you just fluffed your hair up a little bit, get a little bit taller on top there. It'd be great.
A little bit taller.
A little bit taller. I'm already over 6 feet. I don't need to get much taller.
Well, your hair, you're swaffed. There
Fair
it is.
Oh, well, I think we've exhausted that, and I agree. Everybody takes a little bit of turmoil. Everybody reacts differently. I don't think that they're going out of their way to create this environment of endorsing incel behavior, and I think that we need to nip that in the bud, because otherwise, all it's going to do is create a way to restrict and hinder future pieces of art.
Yeah, that's something I was going to say is it's chill out, people. It's just a fucking movie. You don't have to go, have a nice day. I mean, Jesus Christ. It's a fucking movie. Don't like it. Don't go. And don't try to control everybody else around you because you don't feel comfortable or whatever. That's what really pisses me off, is control. This extreme sensitivity of the extreme, I don't know what to call it. Just, I don't know, the radical left. What the fuck are you going to call it? Just there's got to be some limits of this whole. God, I don't know what to call it. I'm trying to think of that word for, like, just overly sensitivity to anything that makes you feel the least bit uncomfortable. That's like
conservatism.
The opposite. Yeah. But yeah, that's my thing, is it's a movie. If you don't like the movie, don't watch. If you don't like the music, don't listen to it. Just let people be, because to control a movie and the future of art with movies and music is pathetic. To me, I don't like that at all. It's a form of control.
Exactly. And it's kind of similar to the last segment we're going to talk about, where the Canadians controlled the indigenous people across the board.
So, just a little correction. it's not specifically about us trying to control people per se, as to how we as Canadians are, trying to make it up for doing stuff like that. Because sometimes we're really apologetic. Sometimes.
But you do have to admit that Canadians did do the exact same thing that the Americans did when it came to indigenous people, correct?
Oh, yeah. And we did the same thing to Japanese that the Americans did, too.
And you did it first, right?
Okay, well, I didn't realize it was a contest, but yeah. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
I'm not either. So we'll table that discussion for another podcast.
My wife just reminded me that we also did it to the Chinese.
That's true, too. Oh.
So
anyway, so you wanted to talk about truth and reconciliation, which is kind of funny because as I'm doing some you sent me these links, I'm doing a little bit of research, I'm reading the articles you sent me, and I'm sitting here thinking, you guys have an amazing way as Canadians of saying this, right? Like we call it reparations or we ignore it as Americans. It's one of the two things. That's it. You guys have like this fancy name called truth and reconciliation.
Absolutely. So why don't we get started? In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Iahe Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations. I apologize if I said any of those wrong. I was told how to, and I may have done it wrong.
Hey, you're just like me. It's okay.
I'm white. I get it. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Finally, we acknowledge all nations, indigenous and non, who live, work, and play and help us steward this land, honor, and celebrate this territory. This sacred gathering place provides us with an opportunity to engage in and demonstrate leadership on reconciliation. So aside from my little acknowledgement of my probable bastardizations of pronunciations, what I just opened that with is what we call the land acknowledgement. So just a quick explanation. I'm actually going to borrow from Tim Fox of the Blackfoot Confederacy from the Blood or Kainai Reserve. He was actually the one kind enough to provide me with so many of the jumping points and help me understand more on the subject. So here's what he has to say about the land acknowledgement. Acknowledging land is part of a change process and an act of reconciliation. To create understanding, acknowledging land builds upon community and honors the authentic history of Turtle Island and the original people. Context needs to be considered by all those also incorporating a change process into their practice. This includes the whole of this land and this country. So land acknowledgement is part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that began in 2008. The reason we do land acknowledgement is for a couple of different reasons. So it acknowledges the traditional custom for Indigenous people that dates back centuries, millennia. It's a very important step for reconciliation. It begins a conversation, and something that I had never even considered, but it gives us the opportunity to get to know the community we're acknowledging. So in conversation with Tim, there was a mention about an event in Red Deer, and there was a woman who had heard the land acknowledgement for both Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 peoples, and she was confused and couldn't really understand the correct way to acknowledge the land was. So the reason why I mentioned that it's in Red Deer is only about 150 kilometers or 100 miles north of Calgary. Now in Calgary, we are Treaty 7, but in Red Deer it's Treaty 6 and Treaty 7. So the importance of that is acknowledging the fact that Indigenous peoples were nomadic and not restricted by borders as we see them. So for the Indigenous peoples, borders are more geographical and regional, not the imaginary lines drawn on the ground as our colonial mindset sees them. Tim actually showed me a map that I haven't seen since I was in elementary, junior high, and it was just the different geographical regions of Canada. Just remember, like I said the first time I did this with you folks, Canada is really big.
But there's not a lot of people. It's big, and
No.
there's not a lot of people.
It's bigger than the States, but we have less than the population of California.
Yep.
So this kind of helps highlight the regional differences amongst the First Nation peoples, and how the landscape, climate, precipitation, etc., would influence their cultures and day-to-day life in general. Still with me?
Yep.
Perfect. So there are three main points to land acknowledgement. So reconciles the shared history, which is a term I'll come back to later. It acknowledges all efforts that were strived for by our country have always been strived for by the stewards of the land, the First Nations people. And it also acknowledges the strategic design by the settlers and colonists. So the strategic design of the way they moved in, set up shop, and slowly began exterminating, converting, and assimilating the people who lived here. Now, as some of you who more astute listeners may have heard, I've complained about having another conservative government. So previously we had the NDP, and at every government function, the land acknowledgement was done. However, since the political angle, I guess, has changed in our government, now it's become kind of a matter of personal choice, as said by the conservative government's Minister of Indigenous Affairs. Not exactly a proud moment. So now we're kind of getting.
Why is that? What? So explain to everybody why that's a big thing.
Okay, so as I was saying, so the importance of the land acknowledgement is a crucial part of this reconciliation, because it keeps the conversation going. It keeps it fresh in our minds. It keeps us coming back to, and we are recognizing that this land that we built all this wealth on was pretty much stolen from the people who lived here, they weren't masters of the ecosystem, they were a part of the ecosystem. So instead of trying to control every facet of it, they lived as a part of it. Later on down the line, I do want to get into, I will talk more about, some of the different cultures and whatnot. And actually what was really interesting that I found out was one of the main rivers that runs through Calgary, the Elbow River, got that name because of its shape. The Blackfoot Confederacy, the Blackfoot Nation who lived here prior to the settlers, that's in their language, that was what they referred to it as. It was shaped like an elbow, so that's what they knew it as, which is just kind of a funky little tidbit of history to learn. So now why don't we talk a little bit more about what reconciliation is. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, henceforth known as TRC, because otherwise it's a mouthful and I'd need a lot more water, was kicked off in 2008 to facilitate reconciliation among former students of the residential school system, their families, and in truth, all Canadians. It started in 2008, as I said, when Stephen Harper, who those of you who don't really know Canadian politics may not know, he was oddly enough a conservative. We had a conservative government at the time in our federal government. Justin Trudeau is liberal, so it's more centrist. NDP is the left. And he acknowledged that there was a great harm caused to the cultures of Indigenous and First Nations people.
So that's a good thing, right? That would be, we would consider that a good thing, because that means this legislation is going to get bipartisan support.
Yes, and I want to be more optimistic about it, because seeing that it did come from a conservative government, and one that at the time I kind of supported, but I've seen the errors of my ways. I mean, obviously, this wasn't his idea. However, it is something that he did kick off. So in his speech, he acknowledged that there were two primary objectives of the residential school system. Now, this is just a brief. The residential school system of Canada is its own segment. So the two objectives were: one, remove and isolate the children from the influence of their home, families, traditions, and cultures. Number two was to assimilate them into the dominant culture. Ultimately, these two goals led to the cultural genocide of the indigenous peoples, and was really only made possible by sentiments that indigenous people and their cultures were inherently savage, inferior, and unequal.
So hold on. I'm going to stop.
Sure.
So you're saying that the original legislation back in 2008 essentially wanted to say, hey, you should no longer be a part of, you should not have your own individual identity, but you should assimilate into Canadian culture.
Sorry, so those two objectives that I just mentioned, those were the goals of the residential school system, started long time ago. The last residential school actually didn't close until the 1990s.
Okay. So before this legislation was put into place, that's what you're telling me. That's how the Canadian government tried to handle and deal with these specific things. Was that instead of acknowledging individuals on their own basis, acknowledging other cultures, they said, nope, try to become white.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was part of what I referred to when I brought up the strategic design, essentially.
Yeah. But the new legislation is kind of coming in here saying, hey, hold on a second. Maybe we should relook at this and see if there's a better way.
Essentially, it's acknowledging what happened, and instead of pretending it didn't and trying to be smiley and saying, you guys can just get over it any time now, saying, nah, we done messed up. We really messed up.
Like kind of come at you, brah. Isn't that from like 3 weeks ago? I don't remember what it was.
Goodness me, I'd have to go back through my notes.
Anyway.
Yeah, essentially the main goal of the residential school system was to kill the Indian in the child.
Yes. And make them, again, assimilate into white culture, which is similar to what, the United States has done.
Yes.
In previous iterations of our society.
Right. So they were discouraged by way of physical force from speaking their own language. I don't believe they were actually allowed to talk to their families for many years. They had to practice the religions of whoever was running the schools. And Justin Trudeau, actually, shortly after he came to power, did comment on how there was a lack of apology from the Catholic Church's involvement in that.
Yeah, because that's the Catholic Church inside of Canada is a big thing, isn't it? Even if they don't have as much power as they do in the United States, it still is somewhat of a rampant thing that is seen through Canadian culture.
I want to say yes and no. I think the only reason that Catholicism is so...
You sound like one of those those people that are reading my future. I want to say yes.
This is just speculating because I'm not 100% sure. But I believe that the big reason for the Catholic Church's prominence is simply because it does have an organizing and a governing body, whereas with many other religions, there are different factions, and they don't have the same structure that you can find within the Catholic Church.
Exactly. And I think the Catholic Church has been a scourge on many different countries, personally. But in Canada, it seems to always have had somewhat of a place, created somewhat of a foothold because of the consistency and its ability to be consistent in its resolutions and laws and requirements and rules that it tries to push into government.
I don't believe they're actually all that influential in our government. The big difference that I've seen between American and Canadian politics, very few Canadian politicians actually bring up religion. Very few of them talk about their adherence, what their faith is, which, I mean, to be fair, I think is good. I don't agree that we should be judging somebody based off of their religious predilections, although we might be able to draw some things about their character from that, but that's by and large really, again, just kind of a speculative move there. So back to Harper's speech. So after his speech, there were 94 calls to action, and I won't go into each and every one of them because we don't have, another hour and a half for me to read off that document. But I will go over the headings, and they focus on child welfare, education, language and culture, health, justice, and reconciliation. So these calls to action provided a public platform for support and ceremony for the survivors of the residential school system to come forward and to tell their stories. The final report for the TRC was released in 2015, and what this did was outline ways for communities to begin a collective journey towards reconciling the shared history of Indigenous peoples and the settlers, ultimately resulting in 5 vital priorities: poverty reduction, strengthening relations with Indigenous communities, pursuing a sustainable future, living a creative life, and encouraging mental health, which is a very big deal. So just a quick side note. I've known Tim for a few years, actually. When we first met, he ran a program where he would work with domestic violence, men who were being involved in domestic violence. And he showed me some of the program that he used because I was really curious. And it focused strongly on, helping the abuser come to terms with their actions and learn how they impact their community by behaving that way, and how they can learn to be better stewards of their community and, not engage in those negative and detrimental behaviors. I thought it was really fascinating because it catered more to a stance of restorative justice, I guess, as opposed to just punitive justice, which is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, except because, restorative justice isn't just taking criminals and locking them up.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing that, American culture lacks is actually restorative justice. I mean, we lock people up, we put them away, but we don't give them the ability to rehabilitate. And it's kind of funny, little side story. When I was in high school, the church I went to used to go on missions trips up to Canada to minister on reserves, right? And it was kind of funny because we would go on these reserves, and I made quite a few contacts and friends from this, and people would talk to us about how the culture here was essentially the government said, well, do your own thing, but if you want our help, you have to assimilate. And a lot of the reservations that we visited refused to assimilate for the pure fact that they wanted to maintain their cultural heritage. Now, this is back in, the late 90s. That's when I did this. But it's kind of funny now, here we are talking about this, and, in 2008, you're telling us, hey, the Canadian government finally said, hey, hold on a second, maybe we fucked up. And here I was going and trying to preach Jesus, and all these people wanted to do was, find a way out of poverty, find a way out of heroin, out of sex. Some of these people were sex slaves inside of their own community. It was insane. Disgusting. Like, I can't even imagine that these people could be neglected in the same way, in the way that they were. And it kind of opened up an opportunity for me to understand later on in life, I can relate back and see what our society in America does very similar. You guys are just a little nicer about it, in your aspect or in your methods.
Yeah, we'll call it nicer. So, pop quiz. We talked about this a few weeks ago. When was the Confederation of Canada?
1776. I don't fucking know. Oh, shit.
And Boyce is fired.
Yeah.
1712.
You're both fired.
Fair enough.
July 1st, 1867. So the only reason I'm bringing that up is because we 2 years ago had our 150th. It was this big Canada 150 celebration. So the importance of that is that due to the ongoing efforts to suppress and actively neglect the history of our treatment of Indigenous peoples, it was seen as Canada 150 was seen as a point of contention. So much so that Dr. Leroy Littlebear, who had attended a residential school himself and is the first Indigenous person to have been cited by the Supreme Court of Canada, sought to use his stance as ambassador for Canada 150 to include Indigenous voices so they can tell the story of what's been previously untold. He's kind of a badass rock star, I'm not going to lie. So that's a little bit about what reconciliation is, but now we have to ask the question of whose responsibility is it? In some of my research, I came across a really interesting term. Allies and accomplices. Now, allies are great. Everybody wants allies. But the difference between an ally and accomplice is the word accomplice suggests action. So ultimately, the responsibility falls on everyone. We have what's called a shared history. It's not just their history. It's not just our history. It's both perspectives coming together for a shared history. So that's when I use the term shared history, that's what I'm referring to.
It's not like an ally of necessity where we need them.
Right. Yeah, it's not just somebody who's, cheerleading, but somebody who's also getting involved and is going forward, all of that good stuff. So the importance of reconciliation, it's not to create lines and divide peoples based on heritage, but to help us to come to terms with, again, our shared history. Because once European settlers arrived and they began interacting with First Nations peoples and changing the landscape, the history was no longer theirs. It was no longer ours. It was shared by all of us. So it includes the land displacement of First Nations peoples, the residential school system, indigenous populations who are too frequently overlooked, and it acknowledges as well as provides perspective of all peoples, not just the settlers, as we've come to see in our history books. I mean, I embarrassingly have to admit, I didn't know a whole lot about all of this growing up. I didn't even realize the ramifications of indigenous peoples living in different regions in school. We never really talked about it. We had this romantic idea of what they were and all of that. And it's very tragic that the school system, for me, really glossed over that. Now, apparently my wife, who went through the Catholic system, apparently they did talk about it a lot more. So that's kind of terrifying.
Did they talk about it in a positive light or a negative light?
She was just more aware of it than I was.
We converted these savages to Christ.
So in short, reconciliation, it's not about giving the land back. It's just acknowledging the truth and making room for all perspectives. And the historic treatment of indigenous peoples is a part of a shared history that many settlers with opinions, which is another term that I've come to use, basically just, ignorant people of privilege who decide how everybody else needs to live, believe indigenous people need to just get over it. And that negates a little thing called generational trauma. Generational trauma, just a quick blurb on that. It's a very new, or I think it's a newer term that's used to describe the fact that for generations, people have had their culture stripped away from them, beaten out of them, and at every effort to reclaim that, it's been taken away from them. And then anytime they've come to try to regain any sort of power, is they've been gaslit into oblivion. They've been almost pushed back onto the reserves, not taken serious, and that's taken its toll on a generation, which then raised another generation based off of their trauma. And continuing on with the trauma of everything still going on, that generation raised another one, and it kept getting passed on.
Have you ever heard of the Dr. Joy DeGruy series, where she talks about the post-slavery syndrome disorder? Talk about generational trauma. You'll want to check her out. She's very, very good. Joy DeGruy, DeGruy. She talks about a term. She has a book called Post-Slavery Traumatic Syndrome or Disorder, from parents being raped and killed and families broken up. Then how do you make good functional children, but the adults are broken, and it's just generational, like you're talking. She does a lot of good research on that too. That
is perfect. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about what reconciliation is not. There are a lot of misconceptions, obviously, by, as I was saying, settlers with opinions. So what it is not is it's not a trend. It's about creating a new and better future through education, acknowledgement, and respect for the stewards of the land upon which so much wealth has been built. It's not a single gesture, action, or statement. Ceremonious gestures, as I said, they're nice, but they lose value. As a one-off, they're not backed when they're not backed by continued devotion to acknowledging and placing value on our shared history. It's not just a box to be ticked. It's not about blame or guilt. And let me tell you, people of privilege love to harp on this one. I think you guys are all too familiar with discussions where it's, oh, you're just white guilt and, white knight and all of that garbage. No, because we're not sitting here saying, we're not sitting here saying, you're the settler who beat, who raped, who murdered and tortured these people and stole their land. No, we're not accusing you of that. We're not being accused of that. We just have a responsibility to share the land that we all live on, to acknowledge the sins of the past, how it's affected the future, and then correct the wrongs that were committed as a society developed and kept them on the fringe. It's not about the loss of rights for non-Indigenous Canadians, and it's definitely not somebody else's responsibility. We're here. Our responsibility is to now and the future that we can create by building a new relationship. Reconciliation, it's a complex and multifaceted process that doesn't happen overnight. It requires continuous effort on the part of all Canadians through honoring the treaties, respecting the rights and identities of Indigenous individuals, shedding negative stereotypes, and learning about the rich and diverse history of the First Nations peoples. By respecting the beliefs, cultures, traditions, challenges, and goals for Indigenous peoples and supporting their connection to the land, we can work towards healing and a better future for all Canadians. All it takes is a humble recognition of our history, a dedication to building relationships, committing altruistic acts, and some mutual respect. And just to wrap up, this is a very, very brief explanation on the importance of truth and reconciliation. For those of you who are curious to learn more, I'll be giving Chris some links. One of them is actually to the TEDx talk given by my friend Tim at a local college. There are a lot more issues to delve into on the subject, but I did want to introduce you all to it and why it's important to me that in later segments, I will provide more about the shared history and going into greater depth. And that's a bit about Canada.
I don't like all this talk about giving back things. I don't like it at all, okay? Sorry, I had to do it.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong.
It's way too kind.
Tanner, do you have any questions?
No, I'll be honest. I think there's a lot more to this that we're passing over personally. And, the big thing here is it kind of feels like there was a mob mentality, right? That went after Indigenous individuals. And finally, the Canadian government said, hey, maybe we did something wrong. Maybe we should change. Maybe we should change our attitude. Maybe we should stop turning a blind eye, and maybe we should start listening to people. And while I don't think, religion is this big thing in my life, I do think it is in other people's lives, and I think people should be able to represent their religion as long as it doesn't harm another person as much as they want. And that's a big thing here. Like we talk about the Catholic Church, and, I brought that up on purpose, right? The big idea here is because the Catholic Church has gone out of its way many a times to utilize its religion to create mass hysteria, to create a way to, get others to conform to a specific, belief set, a specific way of life. And I don't think it's any different in Canada versus America. And Keith, maybe your knowledge, you're saying, hey, they're not as big of a thing. I'm saying they obviously were at some point, because there was a way that your government basically started to wipe out and force assimilation of Indigenous individuals.
Oh, I didn't want to make it seem like I was downplaying their involvement at all. I'm simply saying I think part of the reason why they've been able to be so systematically effective is because they have that organization. I didn't want to make it seem like I was shedding any positive light there at all. No, my apologies if I did that.
And anyway, so the big thing here is as we look at this, and like there's this board game I like to play called Settlers of Catan, right? And you have to be kind of rueful to win this board game. And unfortunately, if we look at it and we go back hundreds of years, both America and Canada played this game to push their prominence inside of different land sets. And now we got to go back and say, how do we fix these things? How do we help these people out? And, one of the big things in Grand Rapids right now is, gentrification. That's a huge issue inside of, the city I live in.
Right.
And I guess at least Canada can say, we were on the forefront of trying to change this. America didn't do that in 2008. We tried to medicalize weed. We elected a black president for once, but other than that, America it takes a far back seat to Canada on many things.
Status quo as usual.
We've just had a prime minister who did blackface a couple of times.
That's true. All right, fine.
Although I do think we did have a woman as a prime minister. It was very brief though. So I think we kind of beat you on that one.
You had to right that ship, huh?
There you go. Well, anyway, Keith, thank you so much for the education, and I think it's important to kind of look at the difference, between America, and then understand that there's some similarity between the two nations.
Just a little bit.
All right, as we wrap the episode tonight, Keith, thank you so much for joining us. Boyce, tell everybody where they can hear about you, learn about you, and listen to your amazing content.
Get to know you.
So as of right now, my Mindful Skeptics podcast and audio is kind of taking a little bit of a back seat. I'm not focusing so much on my atheism, activism right now. I'm really focusing on the YouTube channel. Just going to focus more on political stuff. And other than that, it's just Mindful Skeptics podcast and all your typical Google searches. I'll come up on all the social media stuff as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We had an amazing night. We'll be back next week with another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics, where we get to talk about the Canadian election. And Keith, I think he's so excited about this. He's been messaging me every week saying, hey, by the way, in 2 weeks, this is coming up. By the way, in 3 weeks, this is coming up. We get to talk Canadian politics. Y'all fucking assholes talk about American politics so much. And I think the best part about this whole thing is we get to see even more of these similarities, but Boyce and I get to pick apart Canadian politics for once in an election and get to laugh at the silliness and the stupidity of some of the candidates coming up.
If you want something to laugh at, look up Maxime Bernier.
Oh, I'm going to wait till next week. I'm going to do that next week.
You know what I got to say about that? Outstanding.
Outstanding.
That's outstanding, boys. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks a heck of a lot.
Oh, yeah, buddy. We all love you,
fuck
buddy.
You, buddy. Not your buddy, guy.
What was that saying about if you're all friends? What do you say, Keith?
What?
I don't know.
Friends. What's the slang? Remember?
Yeah, what's the slang for it?
Damn it.
Oh, you're failing me, Keith.
Damn it. We were using it and laughing. It was great.
Flock?
Like get her. It sounds like get her done, but it's like get her boys or some shit. For the boys.
Just giving her.
Just giving her. For the boys.
For the boys.
Giving her.
Just
you're
giving
just
her.
Practice if you're gonna make your way to Canada.
Hey. All right. Well, that's enough of this. This here Bob and Tom segment. We're gonna drink some beers, yay, and I don't know, smoke some dopes, yay.
Please stop it. You're too white for this.
Let's go tackle some moose. Yeah?
White.
You're like Steve Buscemi going, "Hello, fellow kids."
Exactly. There
We're
you
gonna
go.
Smoke a marijuana.
All right. Ooh, all right. Enough of that. Anyway, thank you all for joining us for another Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with more Canadian talk. Chris's horrible accent. Thank you, and have an amazing fucking night.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today because we bring the discussion with the sources.